Like I said, we have a bunch of exciting speakers up, and I'm really excited to introduce our first speaker. We're thrilled to have her here. I actually got an opportunity to see her speak on Tuesday. She's wonderful. Brenna Berman is the CIO of the city of Chicago and has implemented groundbreaking spatial analytics platforms, one of the largest data-driven government initiatives in the country. We like to think of Chicago as the third coast of innovation, and Brenna is helping to make that claim a reality. Once again, we're very excited and honored to have Brenna Berman here, and please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon. So I'm excited for once not to be right after lunch. Lewis has you all warmed up. So, City of Big Data. So I'm going to start with a couple of quick questions first. So we're here today to talk about IoT. How many people here are working on IoT in their business? Pretty good. How many people here live, work, play in Chicago? Okay, pretty good. How many people have thought about putting those two things together? That's actually what I do. So we actually spend a lot of time, and we probably weren't calling it IoT 4 years ago when the mayor took over and we started thinking about how technology could change, city government could change how we deliver services. But we did think a lot about how to better use data to connect with the residents of the city, how to use data to make better decisions and be more efficient inside government, and how to use data connectivity, better customer experience to make it easier to build and grow a business here in Chicago. Well, that's what IoT is. Now we know what to call it. But we've been thinking about that for over 4 years now. And in fact, a little more than a year and a half ago, we put together the city's first technology strategy. And it actually has a lot of elements in it that are actually required for us to become an IoT city. So things like a next generation infrastructure. Depending on where you live and work in the city, you know that it isn't always easy to get the best connection that you need to do your work. We don't have the strongest broadband infrastructure across the city of Chicago. We need to get that fixed. Once that's fixed, we need to make sure every community in Chicago has the skills that it needs to use that infrastructure. We have programs in place to address that gap. And once you have those two fundamental pieces in place, you focus on using that foundation to become the most efficient and effective government you can be. That's my primary responsibility. How you use that to engage the community in building better technology solutions for civic improvement, using technology to help families grow, using technology to grow our economy. So that tech plan is very, very broad and focuses on a lot of the themes that we'll be talking about today. Oh, I went the wrong way. Unhelpful. There we go. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple of the ways that we are using connected technologies and data to change city government here in Chicago. So we do always start with our data. We actually have a huge amount of what I would call administrative data in the city of Chicago, things that we connected for other reasons, right? 311 calls, financial data, and we've started to use that for different reasons. And one of the best examples, part of our predictive analytics program, is around predictive restaurant inspections. So we have more than 15,000 food establishments in the city of Chicago. We have 36 food inspectors. That is a tough mountain to climb. They all need to be inspected to make sure that they're meeting the requirements to be a safe food establishment. And so how do you want to tackle that? One of the best pieces of information we got when we sat down to talk to this team was that they had the data for more than 100,000 past food inspections in a database. Usually when I do discussions like this with teams around the city, they tell me, well, we've got paper files, we jotted this down over here, and it becomes really hard. So we have a really good idea about a model, it becomes really hard to figure out where we're going to get the data and pull it together. This was a little bit easier for us for a change. So we worked with the sanitarian team, which is part of the Department of Health, understood their business model, which at the time was pretty simple, right? They have a map of where all the restaurants are in the city. They build a deployment plan at the beginning of the year. We're going to tackle these restaurants this year. That's actually set by law. And we're going to go after them logically. This neighborhood, this neighborhood, this neighborhood. So that's great. They do actually get to all the restaurants they're supposed to in a year, but they just go in geographical order. That's great, except if the restaurants with the highest level of risk just happen to be in November and December. They spend the whole year providing or creating risk for the residents and visitors in the city of Chicago. The algorithm that we put in place and that is now used by the health department actually increases the rate at which we locate restaurants that are likely to have a food violation faster. We now get to those restaurants 7 days earlier than we did under the old model, which means less food poisoning for people eating in Chicago restaurants. It actually has an economic impact for the city, because if you've ever had food poisoning, you know you're out of work for up to 5 days. So this actually has a huge impact on the city of Chicago. We apply this kind of model to anywhere where we don't have enough resources to do the amount of work that the city needs to, which is in areas like inspections, investigations, filling potholes. So this is a pretty exciting use of data for us. So this is how we use administrative data. So what happens when we start thinking about collecting new data? So the city has actually always, not always, but for a while now, we've used sensors, right? But they've been purpose-built kind of single-use sensors. There's sensors on our bridges to collect information about temperature, because bridges freeze at higher temperatures in the roads, so we know when to go out and salt the bridges. We have sensors out in the lake to collect water temperature and water quality about the lake. They help us make point decisions, which is great. But now we're trying to think about how to put sensor solutions together that help us make broader, more comprehensive decisions about areas of the city that have complex problems. So does anybody here ever have their basement flood when it rains? Yeah, there's always a couple. It's not great. And it's actually a problem caused by two factors. One, over the last 30 years or so, we've seen a change in the weather patterns in Chicago, where we're not getting more rainfall each year, but it's coming at a faster rate at any given time. We also have a combined water sewer system that was built between 1890 and 1930, so it doesn't have the capacity to handle this increased rainflow. So what do we do about that? Well, first we need to actually understand where the bottlenecks are in that combined water sewer system. We don't actually know. Primarily the flooding is happening on the west side of the city, but it is actually hard for us to understand when exactly it's going to happen, where it's going to happen, because it does move around. So for those of you who have flooding, you'll actually notice, like, you'll see a rainstorm coming on the Weather Channel, and you'll be like, God, I'm worried about the flooding, and then it doesn't happen. And then you'll notice another rainstorm coming, and you'll be like, well, it didn't happen last time, and then it happens that time. We actually don't know where those variations in our system are coming from. So sensors that we're putting into our deep water system is going to help us understand where the shortcomings in our current system are coming from, so that we can plan for better solutions to that. And then there are those solutions. So there are some interesting opportunities for us to implement what are called green infrastructure solutions. These are things like landscaping that helps absorb and dissipate rainwater without it going into the combined water sewer system. Things like soft playground foundations. You've probably noticed these if you've been with kids at the park. You're stepping on that squishy, bouncy stuff. That actually can hold rainwater so it can be dissipated more slowly into the system. These are all the types of solutions that can help us manage this problem, except they're all very expensive. Worthwhile investments, but not until we understand how they work. So the sensors that we're putting in place through the City Digital Smart Green Infrastructure Monitoring Project, no acronym for that one, folks, sorry, is actually something that's going to help us understand the nature of the problem and understand the solutions that can impact that problem the most, so that we can make the best use out of our limited resources as we implement those solutions. We're actually implementing this project through a really interesting public-private partnership with UI Labs, which brings together private sector companies, universities, and the city to use the city as a lab to test out these solutions. So not only will we be testing new kinds of sensors together as an overall solution, we'll also be testing two other elements of IoT solutioning that are new for us here in Chicago. One is around edge computing and how we process video within the sensor, because we've never done that before, and how we transmit information back to our central processing through a secure network. We've yet to build one of those, and this will give us a chance to pilot that concept. And then how we bring sensoring or instrumentation to the city as a whole. So how many people in the room are wearing some kind of sensor on their body? A Fitbit, an Apple Watch, mine's a Garmin. I used to tend to be in a minority around that one, but I depend on my GPS. So back when we published that tech plan that I mentioned before, there was an initiative in that tech plan that talked about using the city as an urban lab, right? The mayor is actually very committed to making Chicago accessible to academic researchers, corporations that need an urban environment to test new technologies. And so there was actually a professor down at the University of Chicago named Charlie Catlett, who some of you might know, who was actually reading through the tech plan. He's done several projects with the city of Chicago and was actually sitting there kind of thinking this through. He does actually a lot of urban analytics research. And as he was sitting there reading it, his Fitbit beeped. Like, he tells the story. This is exactly what happened. His Fitbit beeped. And he said, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we had a health monitor for the city? And that was the initial idea that gave birth to the array of things, which is, it's kind of hard to see the picture. That's that little glowing thing up there on the traffic pole. So one of the challenges we have in the city of Chicago, or in any city, is this idea around how you protect sensors out in the weather conditions, right? When we deploy a sensor, it degrades because of the weather, both in the summer and in the winter. We have maintenance issues, how do we go out and switch them out, et cetera. The array of things is a platform that actually allows for the deployment of multiple sensors at one time, provides protection for those sensors, ease of switching sensors in and out, and provides the network capacity to transmit that data back to the central processing point. This particular project will be starting off with a pilot in round about January with 50 nodes, as we call them. Those will be downtown and on the west side, primarily collecting environmental information, everything from temperature to humidity, air quality factors, vibration. And let's see, the first 50 will be up this fall, followed by 150 later in the summer, followed by another 300 the next year, until there are 500 up around the city of Chicago, all collecting essentially environmental information at a micro level around the city of Chicago, giving us essentially a fitness reading about the city. All of that data will be available through the city's data portal so that it's available to any researcher around the world, any community group that may make use of that data, and certainly to me and my analytics team. So why are we doing this? One, it's a pretty cool project, and in general, we're committed to interesting research projects. But also, we think this data is going to be very practical to solving problems that we have in the city right now. So one example is, remember I mentioned that vibration sensor? We actually are really interested in that sensor because vibration can actually tell you when a heavy vehicle, a truck for example, is actually going by that point. And those heavy vehicles have a large part to play in degradation of the roads, which drives the cost and rate at which we need to do road repair. So having that information to help us understand where heavy vehicles are going, the amount of degradation they're causing, can help us adjust and perhaps prevent some of the road maintenance we have to do if we can manage where some of that heavy vehicle traffic is going. Another thing that we're quite interested in is understanding temperatures across the city at a more micro level. So we all know if you wake up in the morning and you check the weather and it tells you it's 70 degrees out, that actually varies a lot on exactly where you are. Now, most of the time that's lake effect, how far north you are, how far south you are, do you actually need a sweater? Because 70 by the lake is not actually 70 if you're more on the west side. But there's actually something else going on with temperature in the city at a more micro level, and that's this urban phenomenon that a lot of health researchers know about called hotspots, which has nothing to do with the meteorological temperature fluctuations in a city, and something else that may or may not have to do with traffic, other kinds of gas emissions in our atmosphere, but something that happens in small scale in the city, block by block, where temperature can vary by as much as 2 to 3 degrees. And health researchers are fairly sure that those hotspots do have health consequences to people who live and work in and near those hotspots. The array of things will give us those specific temperature readings around the city to allow researchers to do more in-depth research about those hotspots, understand them better, and allow us to explore both policy and technical solutions to that problem. So those are things that we know we might do with this data. What I'm actually most excited about is the things that are going to be done with the data that I don't know about. So one thing that we've learned so far about the city's data portal is that people out in the community, be they civic developers, community groups, companies, use that data for things that I've never thought about. And that's perhaps the most exciting thing about this project is, say we're all back here, as we hopefully will be in a year's time, I'll probably be talking to you about 3 different projects that I'm not even aware of today. And that's going to be the most exciting thing about this project, is those things that I'm not even sure of. And what would be most exciting is for me to be sitting out there in a year's time and have some of you up here talking about the projects you're doing based on this data. So that's what we're doing with urban instrumentation. One more thing I forgot about this is 2 more things. One, entirely open source. Everything in this is either built on commercially available components that you can order off of Amazon. One small part is actually built by Argonne Labs at this point, but all of the details of that are available online. And if you're good with a soldering iron, you can build it yourself. And all of the plans, specifications, and policies related to the array of things are available online, so entirely available to the public. We also are doing this in collaboration with 10 other cities around the world who will be implementing similar nodes, though at a smaller number at the same time that we are, so that we can do some baselining and lessons learned. So very, very exciting. Finally, as we all know, right, I think that Lewis put up that really great number about $4 to $11 billion of trillion. Good God. I'm never sure how to think about $1 trillion. So I actually think that Chicago should have the lion's share of that economic growth, Chicago in the Midwest. And the mayor happens to agree with me, or I'm agreeing with him is probably the way that that works. And the reason for that is because Chicago has the foundation, and the Midwest has the foundation to capture all of that value, right? We have a long history of growing businesses, growing jobs, growing economic value around applied technologies. And the industries that we're already seeing embrace IoT, healthcare, automotive, manufacturing, all live here in the Midwest. So to help make sure that we're collaborating, that we're getting the word out that Chicago is the place to be for IoT, I worked with the Illinois Technology Association to launch the Internet of Things Council back in March. And this is just a working group that brings together leadership from different companies across disciplines and universities to make sure that we're working together to communicate good messages, provide training, certainly hosting conferences and talks to make sure that we're all working together as we grow our businesses and grow technologies and solutions here in the Midwest to make it clear that Chicago understands IoT, that we're a leader in IoT, and that we are positioned to capture most of that $1 trillion number that Lewis put up there on the screen for us. So this is actually pretty exciting, and I hope communicates to all of you the commitment and leadership that the Midwest can play in that space. So this is essentially what we've been doing here in Chicago around IoT. Lewis also put up there a really interesting slide about how to get started in IoT, which can be a little bit daunting, especially in government, frankly. And everything he had on his slide are things that we think about in the city about how to get started, right? Think about what for us is the resident experience first. What kind of value are we creating with the solution we're putting in place? Never tackle technology for technology's sake. And I think the one thing that we think about that is in addition to Lewis's slide is what is your data already telling you? What value can you create with the data that you have? So we often go back to the data that we already have and structure solutions, at least as a starting point, structure solutions around what we have today and what we can easily build value to tomorrow. We started very, very small. Some of you might be familiar with a little rat baiting solution that we built about 1.5 years ago. There's a lot of news about rats in Chicago. We use predictive analytics and a small mobile app to drive predictive rodent baiting. was very small, very easy to implement. We had all the data. We had a pre-existing app that we were able to connect together. So we started small and we're growing from there. And that would probably be my only recommendation in addition to what we've already talked about today. So that's what we're doing here in the city. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate being included in today. It's been really interesting so far. And I do have a little bit of time for questions if there are any.
Questions in the back?
Sure, it's Cliff Deutsch again. Just the question is, the devices that are going to go up on the the light poles. What are you monitoring for? Sound, noise,
Yep. No,
temperature, air quality.
Yep. No, it's all primarily environmental factors. So vibration. The sound is all sound sort of variability and consistency. So no specific noises. Air quality is around sort of air particulates, so carbon dioxide, that kinds of things, emissions, temperature, humidity, light intensity, so things like that. Now there is the ability for additional sensors to be added to these platforms over time. So the list that I just gave is essentially what will be in the first 50, and then there will be the ability to expand them into the additional ones over time.
Hi, Brenna.
How are you?
How about, you mentioned the trucks and the roads. How about, I don't know if it's still going on, using the data from divvy bikes, smartphones, how people are navigating and privacy stuff.
So we won't be, so in the first 50, there will be a low-resolution camera in them, which is there primarily to help do some of the diagnosis around the flooding problem we talked about. They're there to look at standing water. They will be able to, they will be used to do some pedestrian and vehicle traffic counting, but all of the video processing is done in the device, and all that's transmitted back for sort of data and information usages is the count. So from a security perspective, the only thing that's actually used is the count, none of the actual data, so there'll be no identification possible. To be very clear, we're not looking to actually sort of collect any individual information about people with these devices. We're looking to collect information about the city itself. And then in terms of the overall security sort of protocols about the devices, those are listed out in detail on the Array of Things website. And then we're putting privacy policies in place that we'll be vetting publicly later this fall to make sure that we're creating a level of comfort with the community, since this will be a publicly deployed project. Yep. Oh, 1 second.
Hi, Lauren Kremen from Beam Centauri. So this is all really progressive, especially for a city, it's amazing what you're doing. And I'd imagine that you came up against a lot of different obstacles throughout implementation, especially just given that there might not be immediate returns or payoffs. Can you talk a little bit about what you did in order to overcome those?
Sure. So there's actually very little pushback internally because we have a lot of strong leadership from the mayor. And so a lot of the pushback for projects like this can come from the use of city resources. So we're actually very careful about how taxpayer dollars come into play here. So the analytics projects are all funded by a grant from Bloomberg Philanthropy, so that helps. The water sensing project is done through a public-private partnership where the city's contribution is all our in-kind time. So certainly there's taxpayer dollars implicated in our salaries, but there's no green dollars spent there. And then the Array of Things project is all funded by a more than $3 million grant from the National Science Foundation and grant money from Argonne Labs. So part of how we get around the pushback around, like, is this the right use for city resources, is we work very hard to secure grant dollars to fund any of our more innovative projects. To work around the pushback you might get from, sort of going back to that privacy policy, right? Are we getting, which would be more the last one, are we getting too close to sort of that line of city's privacy or residents' privacy? We're very, very mindful of that. which is why, one, everything we develop is open source, so anyone who is interested can get a good look at what we are building and provide feedback. There's also a strong education program around the array of things that goes into place several months before we deploy anything, where we go into the area high schools and work with community groups to educate people in that community about what the array of things is for, how they can use it, and work with that community to truly understand the project and gain their buy-in. There was one up front. Go.
Oh, sorry. I assume once you did this project, you did a little bit of benchmarking. What would you consider the benchmark cities for attempting this, aside from Singapore?
Yeah, that's always a good one. So the array of things is a first of a kind. There is nothing comparable to that around the world, which is actually why we wanted to bring other cities into the fold. So the cities in the U.S. around the array of things that are working with us are, and I'm not going to get them all, but are Atlanta, Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, Denver, and I'm sure I left some off the list there, and then in Europe, Glasgow, Warsaw, London, and a couple of others as well. In general, around IoT, all of the Nordics are pretty good to talk to around things like this. Barcelona is always a leader, though sometimes, like Barcelona does a lot of really, really strong work on like resident engagement and kind of more consumer services. They don't do a lot of work around IoT solutions that improve service delivery, things you might consider more sort of industrial solutions. And then Singapore and Korea is quite good actually as well. But they have an infrastructure that any of us would envy. So we can't replicate a lot of what South Korea has done.
Hi, I'm Sarah Brown with James Berman Associates. I study the Internet of Things and I consult in the Internet of Things. And I'm curious, having spoken to some of your peers working towards smart cities, the sort of holy grail is where you take all your connected city systems, whether that's emergency response, water level monitoring, digital signage, traffic monitoring, and bring them all together into a dashboard that lets you make really interesting, exciting decisions and provide great services.
Yeah.
And when I talk to people, including the people that you just mentioned in other cities that are leading this effort, they're struggling to make that happen.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what's your sort of roadmap to get there?
I actually don't know that is, so we are very committed to being able to have the right solutions and the right information to make the most important decisions. I don't know that an Uber dashboard is actually the answer to that. So this might be controversial. We'll see. That Uber dashboard, I think, was a bit of a product play by the IBM, Cisco, / big guys of the world, right? That was this, and I'm from IBM, so I'll put that out there, so I know where that came from. And so who would actually, so except for the mayor, who has overview of everything, and maybe his chief of staff, who actually rely on the people who run all of those services, who actually needs every piece of information that the city has?
I would imagine that for emergency response in particular.
So, that's not an Uber dashboard, though.
I'm just saying connecting the various services together.
So we've actually done that. We've actually done that. So we run an application called Windy Grid that we built the beta of in response to or for the pending NATO conference 4 years ago now. So that was the beta. It's better now because we had very little time. And that came out of, so we were sitting in a planning meeting for the NATO conference. And the chief of staff said, we need to make sure that police can see where fire is, can see where traffic is, can see where the health and human services response teams are, because we had a lot of things we had to manage around that. And she said, we just need to be able to see it all in one picture. We can do that, right? And then she walked out of the room. You have to know her to realize that she does that kind of thing. She throws a big bomb in the middle of the room and walks out. And we have all of that data. The ability and any city is probably in the exact same boat. We have all of that data. We're very lucky that there's GPS trackers on every single one of our vehicles. We actually generally have the ability to know where most of our staff is, especially when you're talking about emergency response staff. We know where our cops are. We know where our firemen are. We know where our buses are. All of that information is in very different silos, and the ability to connect that was a challenge. We had 9 weeks. So one, we didn't have the money to buy anything big. If we had had the money to buy anything, we couldn't have, this is government, we couldn't have properly procured it. And even if we could have properly procured it, I doubt we could have installed it in the amount of time that we have. And this is what happens when you're in a new administration. You're all really, really excited. And I think we were actually, at that point, a relatively young group of people. So we're like, we'll build it. Oh my God. So if you can all picture kind of the work that we all probably did when we were like in college, and there's cots and lots of fast food and not enough sleep and not enough showers, that you got the picture. It was not pretty. And we stood, so we had an Esri front end, because Esri is the GIS system that we run, as many cities and many organizations do. Mongo back end, we did all the connections. It is a common operating picture of all of the city's operational resources. We use it for emergency response. We use it to manage parades, anything where we have city resources operating together. So to give you an idea of how it works for a parade, which, you know, so the Blackhawks win, which is nice, it happens once in a while, and the parade comes down Washington Avenue. That's actually an incredibly expensive proposition. You're rerouting buses, you're shutting down roads, you need to clean up, the police are there to manage the crowds. Traffic services is also there to manage the crowds, and we tend to be paying all of them overtime. So you want to shut that down, shut that road down, and open that road up as quickly as possible. And there is a nice little GPS tracker on the Stanley Cup as well. So for those of us that can't get out to the parade, we can actually watch it on the application. So you watch this go down the street, and being able to see all of that at once. So when you used to manage a parade, right, you were doing this by essentially radio, and so for Streets and Sand to come by and clean up after the parade, you're actually waiting to hear from traffic services that the parade has gone by such and such street. Traffic services have come in. Then the CTA is waiting to hear from traffic services, or waiting to hear from cleanup that they're done so they can wait to reopen the streets. Pretty inefficient, because you're waiting for humans to remember to call another human. We now do all of that in a common operating picture. It's reduced the cost of managing a parade by close to 30%. The other thing the application does for us, it collects all of this data on the back end, which gives us a historical view of how we're, for example, managing parades. So my team can analyze that on the back end, and we can take a look at how to change our processes holistically. That's not a dashboard per se, but it actually does what we need. So I don't know what the Uber dashboard is the answer. For us, we look at what information people need to make the decisions that we're trying to make day in and day out, and then go after that. That makes sense? So I'm getting the wrap-up message. Thank you all very much. It was great to be here.